A wave of laughter rippled through the room when she asked the waiter to play a song. But the instant his fingers found the keys, a stunned collective silence descended, heavy with unspoken understanding. The ballroom at Columbus, Georgia's Franklin Cultural Center pulsed with golden light and the polite hum of conversation. Tables shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, wine glasses chimed, and a quartet played a tune both elegant and utterly forgettable. It was a space where names on silver pins weren't for identification, but rather a gentle reminder of status. Near table 9, Harold Benton moved with practiced quiet, gathering half-empty champagne flutes. At 67 he had perfected the art of being unseen, a man who navigated life by avoiding notice. He didn't mind, not truly. He understood that some people only acknowledged you when they needed something or when they sought to diminish you. He'd learned to let it roll off him. Yet this evening something shifted. Camilla Wexler, a woman who seemed crafted from diamonds, sat like a perched bird at the room's core. Her eyes drifted to Harold as he reached for a glass near her elbow. She offered a performance of a smile, not a genuine one, then gestured with her head towards the baby grand piano nestled in the far corner by the bar. "You know," she declared, her voice carrying, "I'll bet you can play. Why don't you grace us with a little something? Set the mood." A few hesitant chuckles drifted around the room from those who laughed out of habit, not comprehension. Camilla sipped her wine, her eyes sparkling as if she'd just delivered a brilliant witticism. Harold didn't react. He simply met her gaze, steady and calm. The clinking of silverware softened. A few heads turned. Someone near the stage subtly lowered a microphone stand, then froze. Harold carefully placed his tray of glasses on a nearby table. Without a word, he walked towards the piano. The silence that followed him was palpable, stretching like a vast, empty hall. No one stirred. Not Camilla, not the mayor, not the man mid-bite into a scallop skewer. It was the kind of hush that posed questions before any answers could form. Slowly he pulled out the bench, dusting it with one hand before sitting. For a second, his fingers hovered above the keys as if summoning a distant memory. Then he began. The initial notes were soft, almost swallowed by the hum of the air conditioning, but they landed with undeniable weight. This wasn't background jazz. This was Clair de Lune, slow, aching and fragile, each note fighting for existence. People paused mid-chew. A woman in the back lowered her phone and blinked. Camilla straightened in her seat. Harold's hands moved with grace, with the echoes of long practice. He didn't glance down, he didn't need to. The music poured forth from a place far older, far deeper than this moment. There was no sheet music, no flourish, just a man, a piano, and a truth that transcended words. By the time he reached the piece's intricate middle section, where the melody folds in on itself like a hushed breath, no one was laughing. No one was speaking. A server froze mid-stride, tray perfectly balanced. The event photographer slowly lowered his camera. Even Camilla's expression changed. The smirk vanished, her wine glass suspended, untouched. Harold, however, didn't seek their gaze. He didn't require their approval. He was somewhere else entirely, perhaps a cramped Baltimore apartment with peeling paint and a worn upright, or a forgotten stage from a lifetime ago before everything changed. As the final notes faded, the room held its breath. Then came the applause, but it was unlike any heard after a typical performance. It was hesitant, reverent, tinged with something akin to guilt. Some clapped slowly as if unsure if they deserved to. Camilla remained still, her hands in her lap, but her eyes held a different light. Yet no one in that ballroom had the faintest idea who Harold Benton truly was, or what had been irrevocably taken from him, long before the tray, the tuxedo, or the polished shoes. Harold Benton was a boy who often drifted to sleep with his fingers curled around piano keys. He grew up in a Baltimore row house, its thin walls echoing with his mother's gospel hymns as she folded laundry. His father was a quiet shipyard worker, a man who believed discipline trumped dreams. But Harold's mother saw things differently. "You have something in your hands, baby," she'd whisper, pressing his small fingers between hers. "Don't ever let them tell you otherwise." By 11, Harold could hear a song once and reproduce it by ear. At 13, he was composing his own pieces. Fragments of sound woven from radio tunes or overheard melodies on his walks home from school. His middle school music teacher, Mrs. Cheney, noticed his gift immediately. She was the one who persuaded a local college recording engineer to hear Harold play, the one who helped him apply to Juilliard's pre-college program. She was the one who hugged his mother outside the gray brick building on Uter Place the day the acceptance letter arrived. Juilliard transformed Harold not because of its prestige, its grand buildings, or the city itself, but because of the other students, their quiet confidence, their innate sense of belonging. Harold possessed raw talent, but they embodied certainty. Still, he practiced relentlessly, 8 hours a day, blisters, ice buckets. He skipped parties, avoided dating. His dream was too precise for distractions. He graduated at the top of his class. At 23, he received an invitation to perform at Carnegie Hall for a young composer's showcase. He wore a navy suit 2 sizes too big sent by his cousin from Philly. Yet he played like someone who had waited his entire life for this single night. Afterward, people rose to their feet. He didn't hear their applause, he only heard the profound silence after the final note. A silence he understood more intimately than adulation. But just as his name began to appear in small magazines and college forums, the call came. His sister, Rosalie, had collapsed during her shift at the diner. By the time Harold reached Baltimore, doctors confirmed aggressive leukemia. She had a son, Marcus, barely 5. Their mother had passed 2 years prior. There was no one else. So Harold moved back. He tried to continue playing at first, teaching private lessons, performing small recitals. But hospital bills had a way of eroding dreams. He took a job at a catering company, just for a while, he told himself, something to get them through. One night bled into a week, a month into a year. By the time Rosalie died, Harold had sold the piano. He never returned to New York. He raised Marcus as his own, put him through college, ensured the rent was always paid, kept life quiet. The world didn't offer him a second spotlight and he stopped seeking one. Yet he never truly abandoned the music. Sometimes, late at night, he'd tap his fingers on the kitchen counter, trying to recall a piece he'd once composed during a snowstorm. He couldn't always retrieve the melody, but the feeling it evoked, that never faded. He remained with the same catering company for 33 years. People called him Sir when sober, hey you when drunk. He smiled regardless. He observed the world evolve from behind white gloves and linen napkins, smartphones, hashtags, people demanding oat milk in their coffee without a thank you. Then one day his supervisor asked him to fill in for a retirement party at the Franklin Cultural Center. Nothing fancy, he'd said, just a charity gala, good money, easy gig. Harold agreed. And that's how he found himself standing near Camilla Wexler's table, in a room full of people who hadn't even noticed the piano in the corner until she decided to turn him into a joke. But what Camilla perceived as harmless amusement would awaken something in Harold that had been dormant for decades, waiting in silence for one more chance to be heard. The secret to being a good waiter is making people forget you're there. Harold Benton had perfected this art over 3 decades. He worked rooms teeming with high society, politicians, developers, socialites, old money, new money, tech millionaires who believed they'd invented class. He'd seen it all from the periphery of their conversations, heard whispers not meant for his ears, witnessed business deals unfold between bites of steak, watched infidelity unfold with champagne still on their lips. He didn't judge, but he remembered. His role was to move seamlessly, tray in hand, eyes gentle but perceptive. Never interrupt, never react. Keep wine glasses full, linens spotless. Be invisible, reliable, polite. Most nights he didn't mind. The pay was enough to keep the lights on, enough to put Marcus through 2 years at Howard, then assist with grad school when scholarships fell short. Enough to buy a used Honda with working heat and a stereo that only played FM. Harold didn't crave attention, not anymore. He simply desired stability. Still, sometimes during setup when the room was empty and florists were still arranging centerpieces, Harold would sit at whatever piano had been rolled into place. Always alone, always for just a few minutes. He'd run his fingers gently over the keys, testing them like old bones. He never played a complete song, just enough to gauge the room's resonance, just enough to feel something stir in his chest once more. No one ever caught him, or if they did, they didn't care. He once worked an event in Birmingham where the speaker was a man who had been a fleeting character in Harold's early life, a conductor who had rejected Harold from a summer program decades ago. The man, of course, didn't recognize him, merely waved off the wine list and inquired if the risotto was dairy-free. Harold smiled, nodded, and moved on. That's how it always went. He'd crossed paths with people who had once orbited his world, musicians, agents, professors. Some still in the limelight, most forgotten just like him. None ever looked closely enough to realize the man offering them napkins had once shared a stage with them. Sometimes he wondered if they even remembered his name. It wasn't bitterness, it was reality. You learn to accept being overlooked when the world clearly expects little more from you, especially once your hair grays and your back aches from carrying trays across marble floors. But Harold never completely let go. Every now and then someone would casually ask if he played music. He'd shrug, say used to a long time ago, then change the subject. He didn't need to explain that his life had taken a sharp turn, that Rosalie had needed him, that Marcus had needed him, that music couldn't always pay for medicine or groceries or rent. Yet the sound of a well-tuned piano still tightened his chest. The scent of old sheet music still transported him back to his New York dorm room, where he'd scribble notes in the margins, dreaming of compositions that would outlive him. Now at 67 those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else. He didn't resent the life he had, he'd found peace in its rhythms and simplicity. Some of his co-workers complained, always seeking an escape. Harold simply showed up, did his job and went home. But the instant Camilla Wexler laughed and pointed to that piano, something cracked open. Not because she was cruel but because of what it echoed. How effortlessly someone like her could assume he had nothing to offer but service, treating him like furniture with a name tag. He wasn't angry, he was awake. That's why he walked to the piano without a word. Not to prove anything to her or the guests, but because for the first time in years, someone had offered him an invitation, even if it was meant as a joke. And he took it. He placed his fingers on the keys, not to impress, not for applause, but because they still remembered. But even as the last note of his song lingered in the air, what followed was something he hadn't anticipated, and neither had anyone else in that room. Camilla Wexler wasn't accustomed to being challenged. At 52, twice divorced, she devoted most of her days to committee organization. Her wealth stemmed from an old textile family in Savannah, a lineage whose names were still etched into historic buildings and country clubs. Camilla's upbringing revolved around gala dinners, donor boards and private art auctions. Her father had once told her, "It's not just about having money, sweetheart, it's about being seen giving it away." That line resonated with her more than she'd ever admit. To most in that ballroom, Camilla was charming, stylish, well-connected, a little sharp but generous. She wore custom heels, favored vintage brooches and corrected grammar with a laugh soft enough to seem harmless. She wasn't deliberately cruel, but she operated in a world where assumptions were currency. If you carried a tray, you were help. If you wore gloves, you weren't meant to be heard. If you were older and in a service job, you had probably missed your moment if you ever had one. So when she made the comment about the piano, she genuinely didn't give it a second thought. It was a throwaway line, a bid for a laugh, a way to fill the air and remind the table she was still its focal point. She had no idea the man she'd just made a punchline had once graced stages most people only dreamed of. To her, Harold was just part of the decor, like the floral arrangements, like the candles. But when he turned and walked towards that piano, something shifted. At first she thought he might be playing along. Perhaps he could genuinely plink out a tune and they'd all share a charming, giggle-worthy moment. It wouldn't be the first time someone surprised her with a hidden party trick. She reached for her wine glass and smiled at the others. But when he truly began to play, really play, something inside her seized. She didn't recognize the piece immediately, but she knew it wasn't casual. It wasn't something you picked up from YouTube tutorials or casual tinkering. This was practiced, disciplined, brimming with feeling. She glanced around. The room had fallen utterly silent. That's when it hit her. He wasn't doing this for them. He wasn't performing. He was remembering. And that unnerved her more than she expected. Camilla had spent her entire life in rooms like this one, filled with polite people, gleaming cutlery and conversations about preservation grants and board seats. She was accustomed to holding the microphone, the clipboard, the final say. But now, all eyes were fixed on the man she had attempted to turn into a moment of levity. And not just eyes, cameras. Several guests had already pulled out their phones. Some whispered. A few were even Googling his name in real time, unsure how to spell it. Camilla suddenly felt the weight of her own voice, the careless way she'd used it, the way it now echoed back at her, twisted by shame. Her stomach tightened. She loathed that feeling, not guilt but exposure. Because if people discovered what she'd said, how she'd said it, what it looked like, they'd turn on her. Maybe not tonight, maybe not to her face, but the story would stick. The woman who mocked the waiter, the woman who assumed he had nothing worth listening to. She sipped her wine, attempting nonchalance, but there was no real recovery. Especially not when the last note faded and people actually stood to applaud, not politely, not out of obligation, but out of something else entirely. Admiration, perhaps regret, recognition. Camilla remained seated. The applause didn't feel like hers to give. She glanced towards Harold, who still hadn't looked at her. Good. She wasn't ready to meet his eyes. The moment was slipping from her control, and for the first time in a long time, Camilla Wexler wasn't the one being watched. She was the one watching. But what none of them knew was that this moment, accidental as it seemed, would ignite something far beyond that ballroom, far beyond anything Camilla or Harold could have imagined. Harold didn't rush the ending. He allowed the final note to linger, soft and weightless, before lifting his hands from the keys, not dramatically, just with a sense of completion. He remained seated for another second, as if the air still held remnants of the song. Then he stood, adjusted his jacket sleeves, and returned to the table where his tray rested. But now every pair of eyes in the room followed him. The applause had begun in scattered pockets, small groups of people moved by the music and unsure how to react. Then it spread, growing louder, firmer, until it filled the entire room. Guests rose from their chairs, many still clutching glasses, unaware they had stood. It wasn't a typical standing ovation. It was reverent, almost bewildered. They hadn't expected beauty, not from him, not tonight, and certainly not like this. Harold didn't bow, didn't smile. He simply nodded once, subtle and professional, then resumed his position by the wall. For a few moments no one spoke. Then murmurs began to bubble up. Did you know he could play like that? I think that was Debussy. Clair de Lune, right? I've got goosebumps. A man in a tailored gray suit turned to his wife. Google him. See if anything comes up. Someone else whispered. Was he a professional? He had to be. Camilla Wexler remained frozen in her seat. She felt the weight of every glance directed her way. No one said anything directly, but she could feel it. The shift. The invisible spotlight had moved, and she was no longer under it. She had lit the match, but Harold had become the fire. Across the room, an event photographer named Tyson Cho slowly lowered his camera. He'd captured the entire sequence, from the moment Harold's fingers touched the keys to the stunned expressions of the crowd. He wasn't just snapping party shots anymore. He was documenting something significant. Near the buffet table, Tasha Brenner, a local journalist covering the event for a small arts blog, fumbled to open her notes app. She wasn't meant to be writing about anything serious, just a piece about fashion and museum expansion funds. But this was a different story now. She typed furiously, "Waiter plays Clair de Lune." Crowd stunned. Camilla Wexler joke. Emotional reaction. Must dig into background. Even Harold's co-workers were speechless. Glenn, a younger server who usually handled wine, leaned over and whispered, "Man, what the hell was that? Wasn't expecting it." Another muttered, "That was real playing. Like real." Harold didn't respond. He was back to business, clearing plates, straightening chairs, pouring water as if nothing had happened. His face was calm, unreadable. But inside something had undeniably shifted. He didn't feel pride exactly, nor triumph, just release. It had been so long since he'd allowed that part of himself to breathe, the version of him that existed before life had turned sharp. He hadn't played the full piece in years. Not since Marcus was a teenager and convinced him to try again for a small recital at a community center. Harold hadn't made it past the first page back then. But tonight something had opened. Perhaps it was Camilla's laugh, sharp and presumptuous. Perhaps it was the way everyone had looked through him all evening like he was wallpaper. Perhaps it was simply time. Whatever it was, he'd played like he used to, not perfectly but honestly. He didn't expect recognition or questions or the sudden flurry of attention now buzzing just beneath the surface. People were watching him differently now, and not everyone was comfortable with that. At the back of the room, a board member leaned towards the gala coordinator. "You think he's union? We might need a release if people are filming." The coordinator blinked. "He's a server. Pretty sure that doesn't matter." "He's not just a server," the board member replied. "Not anymore." But while the guests tried to process what they'd just witnessed, something else was happening outside that ballroom, something that would carry Harold's performance far beyond the walls of the Franklin Cultural Center. The videos hit social media before Harold even clocked out. Adrian Lott, a real estate agent from Macon with a flair for viral moments, uploaded a 45-second clip to her Instagram story with the caption, "The waiter just played Debussy like it was Carnegie Hall. Dead serious. Whole room frozen." Another guest, someone Harold had never seen before, posted a longer version to TikTok with the caption, "This man was collecting glasses 10 minutes ago, then this happened." The video was raw, no edits, no filters, just shaky phone footage of Harold at the piano, framed by stunned faces and a woman's soft gasp at the final note. Within an hour, the clips were being stitched, reshared, and debated online. People argued in the comments about his identity, the context, whether the moment was genuine or staged. Others didn't care, they just wanted his name. Meanwhile, Harold rode the bus home as always. His shift ended around 11:15. He changed in the staff bathroom, folded his tux jacket into a neat square, and nodded to the night security guard on his way out. The piano remained in the ballroom untouched. He didn't yet know what was unfolding online. His phone was an old flip model with no apps, no internet. He wouldn't know until morning, until Marcus called him, his voice a mix of excitement and nervousness. But while the internet debated who he was, the people in that room were also beginning to learn more. Tasha Brenner, the arts blogger, wasn't satisfied with her notes. She wanted facts. So she started digging. 2 emails, 1 phone call, and a scanned recital program from 1981 later, she had her headline, "Juilliard pianist turned waiter stuns gala with unannounced performance." By noon the next day, local outlets had picked it up. Harold Benton, 67 of Columbus, Georgia, worked for over 30 years in catering, but decades ago he was a rising star from Baltimore's classical music scene, accepted into Juilliard at just 17. They mentioned Carnegie Hall, the composition award he'd won in his final year, even unearthed an old black and white headshot found in an archived concert flyer from the Lincoln Center. What none of them mentioned, but what Harold never forgot, was how quickly all of that had slipped away. It wasn't solely his sister's illness. That was the tipping point, yes, but it followed a slow progression of closed doors in New York. Harold had been invited to perform but not offered teaching posts. He was respected on stage but invisible at receptions. Audiences applauded then forgot him. When he tried to book his first solo tour, the agent assigned to him asked, off the record, if he'd considered writing for others instead of performing. "You've got real talent," the man had said, "but the concert scene's already tight. Might be better to work behind the curtain." Harold had smiled, thanked him, then never called again. He remembered the time a music director looked at him after an audition and said, "That was beautiful. Unexpected." As if beauty from his hands was something strange. He learned to stop trying to stay in the shadows, not because he lacked the ability, but because the world made it clear it didn't expect him to be more than what it saw. That's what made Camilla's joke sting more than he let on. It wasn't new, it was familiar. A reminder that no matter his past achievements, he was still perceived as someone you could dismiss without consequence. But the piano didn't care about assumptions, and for once neither did Harold. So when he played that night, it wasn't just about reclaiming music. It was about reclaiming himself. And whether or not the guests understood that, the internet was beginning to. In the comments beneath the TikTok video, people were asking, "What's his story? How did we miss someone like this? This man is the definition of hidden talent." But Harold didn't see any of it yet. He was in his kitchen, pouring coffee, frying an egg. The same routine as always. He hadn't checked the voicemail blinking on his old machine. He didn't know that 3 local news stations had already left messages. He didn't know someone from Juilliard had emailed Marcus that morning. But what he did feel, quietly and deeply, was that something had shifted, and he wasn't yet sure if that was a gift or a burden. The next afternoon, Harold returned to work as if nothing had happened. He pressed his shirt, packed a turkey sandwich into a plastic container, and took the same bus, sitting near the window as always. The Franklin Cultural Center had another event scheduled, a luncheon for an education nonprofit, and Harold was assigned to beverages and table resets. By the time he arrived, however, the mood was different. Co-workers who usually just offered a passing nod were staring, whispering. One of the prep cooks paused mid-slice, blinked at Harold and muttered, "That was you, huh?" Harold offered a small smile. "I suppose it was." Tyson Cho, the photographer from the night before, was already back in the ballroom. He waved Harold over, excitement barely contained. Mr. Benton. Do you go by Mr. Benton? Tyson asked. Listen, I just wanted to say that was probably the most incredible thing I've witnessed at one of these events, and I shoot 6-7 a week. Harold's fine, he replied. Tyson fumbled with his phone. Look, the clip I posted. 500,000 views overnight. And people are asking about you. They want to know more. Do you want to talk about it on camera? I could shoot something clean, maybe just a short piece. I appreciate that, Harold gently interrupted, but I'm not looking for all that. He moved on, carrying a stack of water glasses towards the setup table. In the hallway, one of the gala directors from the previous night approached him. Devon Morales, a tall woman with a fast walk and a habit of checking her phone mid-sentence. Harold, she said, stopping short. We need to talk. Everything all right? Yes. Oh. I don't know. She hesitated. Camilla Wexler called me this morning. She's concerned about well, Devon exhaled, about how things looked. The video. Her comment. She says it was taken out of context, but it doesn't look great. She wanted to apologize personally. Harold raised an eyebrow. She's here? She's parking. He said nothing, just looked past her at the banquet room, already filling with chattering voices. Devon lowered her voice. You don't have to talk to her if you don't want, but I think she's trying to do the right thing. Or at least clean it up. Harold nodded, not out of agreement but understanding. When Camilla finally arrived, she wasn't wearing diamonds or vintage brooches. She wore a gray sweater, minimal makeup, and a face that looked as if she hadn't slept. She walked straight towards Harold. Mr. Benton, she began, and her voice cracked slightly. I owe you an apology. You do. I was wrong to speak to you the way I did. I thought I was being playful, but I see now that it was dismissive and deeply unfair. She hesitated. I didn't know anything about your background or your talent or your history, but that's not an excuse. Harold met her gaze for the first time. You didn't have to know my history, he said. You just had to treat me like a person. Camilla swallowed hard. You're right. And I'm sorry. A few onlookers pretended not to listen. One of the guests from the previous night paused, arranging brochures to glance in their direction. Harold didn't care. I'm not angry, he said, but I'm tired of being looked through. Camilla nodded slowly. I understand. Or I'm trying to. There was an awkward pause, not heavy but necessary. Harold broke it. Thank you for saying it out loud. A lot of folks don't. Camilla extended her hand. Harold looked at it, then shook it, firm and brief. She walked away with a little less certainty in her step, but perhaps that was a good thing. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Harold stood outside the staff entrance, watching the sky turn pink over the distant rooftops. Glenn, the younger server, lit a cigarette a few feet away. You ever think about playing again? For real? Glenn asked. Harold shrugged. I never stopped. Just didn't have an audience for a while. Glenn took a drag and nodded slowly. Well, you got one now. But while the immediate moment had passed inside the ballroom, something else was gaining momentum outside of it, and soon Harold would have a choice to make about what came next. By sunrise the next day, Harold's name was everywhere. Not in a headline-grabbing celebrity scandal kind of way, but in that quieter, more meaningful space where people pause their scrolling. On Facebook, strangers were sharing videos with captions like, reminds me of my grandfather, makes you think, or, never underestimate anyone. Harold still hadn't seen any of it. His phone didn't have internet, he didn't even know what TikTok was beyond something Marcus occasionally joked about. He cherished the calm of the mornings. His routine was slow, deliberate, 2 eggs, black coffee, gospel on the kitchen radio. But that morning his voicemail light blinked non-stop. Calls from radio hosts, emails from bloggers, even a message from someone who said they worked with NPR and wanted to hear his story in his own words. It all felt surreal. Marcus had to sit down and read some of the messages to him, laughing at how many people had called his dad, the piano man. Harold just shook his head. I played one song, he said, sipping his coffee. You played one song, Marcus replied, but it meant something. And it did. Across town, in a modest office above a dry cleaner's shop, Tasha Brenner was still typing. Her blog post from the night of the gala had exploded, not viral in a fame-chasing way, but in the way stories spread when they hit a nerve. People weren't just interested, they were moved. She received emails from former Juilliard students who remembered Harold from long ago. A retired professor wrote, "He had magic in his hands. I remember telling a colleague he'd either change the world or vanish from it. Looks like he's finally back." The Franklin Cultural Center posted a photo of Harold at the piano, his head slightly bowed, fingers in motion, with a caption that read, "A reminder that talent has no expiration date." Even the Juilliard School itself retweeted a clip with a simple statement, "Some gifts never fade." But the internet wasn't the only place where ripples were forming. People started calling the catering company, asking for the pianist. Some wanted to book him for private events. One woman claimed her church would love to have him for Sunday service. Just one song if he's willing. There was even an invitation from the local college music department. A professor there had seen the video and wanted Harold to come speak to students about his life, about music, about resilience. Harold listened as Marcus read the offer aloud. "I haven't spoken in front of a crowd in over 30 years, he said. "Then maybe it's time," Marcus answered. Harold didn't say no. He didn't say yes either. He just kept washing his dish, letting the warm water run over his fingers. That night, Marcus came by again with a borrowed tablet and showed him the clip on a bigger screen. For the first time, Harold watched himself play Claire de Lune, watched the moment unfold from the outside. He saw the quiet in the room, the stillness, Camilla's expression shifting as the music built, people frozen, drawn in. He watched himself finish, hands floating just above the keys. Then he leaned back and exhaled deeply. "It's strange," he said. "What is?" "To see yourself like that. As if you've been waiting to be remembered." Marcus didn't push him. He just sat there, letting the silence fill the room. "I think they want more from you," Marcus said finally. Harold smiled. "I'm not sure I have more to give." "I think you do," his son said. "I think you always have." But Harold wasn't a man who chased attention, so when the invitations kept coming, he knew he had to decide. Would he step back into a world that had once left him behind, or let this be a final note, simple and complete? 3 days after the gala, Camilla Wexler appeared at Harold's door. Not the main entrance, not with an assistant in tow, and not dressed like someone expecting to be photographed. She wore jeans, a navy coat, and a scarf pulled tightly around her neck. She carried no gift, no flowers, no carefully worded apology on monogrammed stationery, just herself. Harold had been folding laundry when he heard the knock. Marcus had already gone home. The house was quiet. He didn't rush to the door, just dried his hands, checked the window, and opened it. Camilla offered a small, almost unsure smile. "I don't mean to intrude." "You already apologized," Harold said, leaning against the door frame. "I know," she hesitated. "But that was in a hallway and people were watching, and this?" "This?" he asked. "This is just me. No press. No agenda." He considered her for a second, then stepped aside. They sat in the small living room, unpretentious. A well-worn couch, a wooden coffee table with an old scratch across one side, family photos tucked into modest frames. One of Rosalie sat on a shelf above the TV, smiling in a nurse's uniform. Camilla looked around quietly. "You have a beautiful home," she said. "I built a quiet life. Doesn't get noticed much, but it works." She nodded. "That's probably what made me nervous. Being noticed and not in the way I'm used to." Harold sat across from her, his arms folded. "You're used to attention that works in your favor." Camilla didn't deny it. "I didn't come here to ask you for anything," she said. "I've been thinking a lot these past few days. I keep wondering what that moment looked like through your eyes. You weren't just playing music. You were telling us something, and I didn't listen until it was too late." Harold exhaled through his nose, not quite a laugh, more like recognition. "I wasn't trying to send a message," he said. "I was just tired of being small. You gave me an opening. It may not have come from kindness, but it came all the same." Camilla swallowed hard. "I'd like to learn from it. Not just for show but for real. I've spent years pretending I was the most cultured person in the room, but what you did, what you showed, that was culture. That was depth. I didn't even realize how shallow I've been." "You weren't shallow," he said. "You were unchallenged." She looked up, surprised by the grace in his voice. "I don't need your redemption," Harold added, "but if you want to do something with what you learned, do it without waiting for applause." Camilla nodded slowly. "I'd like to support something meaningful. Something that doesn't come with my name engraved on a wall. Quiet things. The kind that matter to people who don't always get seen. He studied her for a moment, then stood. Come with me. She followed him down a narrow hallway into a room at the back of the house. The piano sat near the window. Not the grand one from the gala. This was a smaller, upright, old but cared for. The bench was worn in the middle. A metronome rested on top, next to a folded photo of Marcus as a kid, playing with Rosalie on the front steps. Harold sat and ran his hand along the keys. I got this one second hand. Rebuilt it myself over a few years, bit by bit. He gestured to the bench beside him. You want to know who I am? Sit and listen. Camilla sat down without speaking. Harold played, not a showpiece, not something anyone would recognize. Just a quiet tune he'd written long ago. It was uneven, a little raw, like memory being stitched back together. When he finished, neither of them spoke for a long time. Camilla finally stood, eyes wet but clear. Thank you. For what? For reminding me that some things still have the power to change people. Harold walked her back to the door. Before she stepped out, she turned to him. If you ever decide to play again for real, I'll be there. Not as a donor, just as someone who wants to listen. Harold gave her a small nod. This time it didn't feel like a performance. But what began as an awkward apology had now become something unexpected. Two lives reconnected by one truth. The past doesn't disappear. It waits patiently to be heard again. 2 weeks later, the community center on Reynolds Avenue was more crowded than it had been in years. The folding chairs were mismatched. The air carried the faint scent of old books and cafeteria trays, but there was a gentle, curious buzz. No fanfare, no press releases, just a paper flyer taped to the glass door. Piano night with Harold Benton. 6 p.m. Free admission. Harold hadn't agreed to anything grand. No ticket sales, no sponsors. Just a piano, a room, and a chance to play again on his own terms. He wore his Sunday jacket, clean and pressed, with a burgundy handkerchief Rosalie had given him years ago. Marcus stood by the door helping people find seats, grinning like a proud stage manager. A few of Harold's co-workers came, along with students from the local college, musicians, elderly neighbors, and even some parents with kids in tow. And Camilla came. She sat quietly in the third row, no makeup, no cameras. She clutched a small notebook, her posture straight, her eyes focused, just one listener among many. The piano was an old upright, donated by a local church, slightly out of tune in places but full of character. Harold ran his fingers along the edge before sitting down. No introduction, no speech. He simply began. The first piece was something familiar. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Slow and thoughtful, a gentle way of opening the door. The room held still. Kids fidgeted in their parents' laps. An older man near the aisle shut his eyes and didn't open them again until the final note. Then came one of Harold's own pieces. He hadn't played it in public since Juilliard. The melody was warm, full of dips and turns, like the sound of walking through memory. Not everyone knew it was his, but it didn't matter. They felt it. And as he played, Harold wasn't thinking about the gala or Camilla's joke or the videos online. He wasn't performing for applause or redemption. He was simply being heard. When the set ended, there was no thunderous ovation, just quiet appreciation. The kind that fills the space between people when something meaningful passes through. A few stood, most just clapped gently, smiling. Afterward, children approached him with shy curiosity. Did you really play in New York? A little girl asked. Yes, I did, Harold smiled. Do you know any songs with dragons in them? Not yet, he said, but maybe I'll write one. Behind them, a man introduced himself as a music teacher. Would you consider coming by the school sometime? Just to talk to the students, maybe even show them a few things. Harold paused for a long time. He'd believed that part of his life was over. But maybe not. Maybe some things didn't end, they just waited. He gave a quiet nod. Let's talk. Later that night, as the chairs were stacked and the lights dimmed, Harold stood by the piano alone. He pressed one key, then another, letting the sound echo softly in the empty room. Camilla approached slowly. She didn't say anything at first. Then, that second piece. It was yours, wasn't it? He looked over. It was. I've never heard anything like it. Harold offered a small smile. You weren't supposed to. Not back then. Well, she said gently, I'm glad I did now. They didn't speak again. She left quietly and he stayed for a while longer, hands resting on the keys like old friends reunited. The next day no one went viral. No cameras showed up. But something had changed. A few days later the community center called Harold again. Someone had donated a new baby grand piano in his name. No plaque, no announcement, just a gesture. Soon after, Harold began holding Saturday sessions. Not lessons exactly, just open afternoons for anyone who wanted to learn, listen, or sit beside a man who carried music in his bones. Children came with curiosity. Teenagers came with questions. And some adults came with regret, remembering what they once let go of. Harold welcomed them all. He never chased the spotlight, but now when he played, people listened. Not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. He hadn't become famous, he'd become seen. And sometimes that's the greatest recognition a person can ask for. Not noise, not headlines, but the quiet knowledge that their story didn't disappear, that it mattered, that it still matters. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life moments that remind us all to look deeper and listen longer.